Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Late Night Learning. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Palumba. Now today we're going to be going through perception and video gameplay. Perception and video gameplay, this really delves into our senses. I know that was a little weird. Our senses, the way that we smell, the way that we feel, the way that we taste, the way that we hear. In video gameplay in particular, it's one of the most interactive mediums that are out there. And so this inherently consumes several of our own senses. Sight for sure, vision for sure, hearing for sure, touch for sure, smelling, maybe in the distant future. I don't know about tasting though. Hopefully we'll never have to taste anything during video gameplay. But smelling might very well be within our lifetime. And so video gameplay seeks to immerse people. Remember, if you've picked up anything during these lectures, that's really primo numero uno. It is so critical that during video gameplay we're immersed. We begin to lose our faculties, and they begin to be replaced with what we perceive to be our reality in video gameplay. If we're playing the Wii, playing on the Wii, and if we hold a sword, and we're Link in a Zelda video game, we might almost feel like we have that sword or shield. Or if we're playing a race car game and we're holding that steering wheel, wireless naturally, and we're dipping and turning, we almost have those sensations, even though at first blush they may appear invisible. But we have those phantom senses. Those of you who may know somebody who might be missing a foot, missing maybe a hand, or somebody who is just tied to their cell phone might feel as though they're missing something, right? There have been studies about this where people who might be missing an arm or missing a leg, they have these kind of phantom tinglings, if you will, that at certain points they feel as though their leg or arm is still there. And so our body is inclined to adapt to our surroundings and to adapt to, what we know. So if somebody tragically loses their arm or tragically loses their leg after they've been born, they do still have a baseline for having that arm, right? They still have a baseline for having that leg. And so in a similar fashion in video gameplay, our senses haven't gone anywhere. They've been transported. They've been transported to a new world. Our senses have to readapt to where we are, and then we move forward. But our senses are now kind of plugged into some sort of virtual reality. So how we touch may be a little bit different, how we hear may be a little bit different, and what we see is a little bit different as well. Further immersion, of course, is provided by virtual reality headsets, VR headsets that allow us to escape into worlds in a 360-degree manner. And so for a lot of video gameplay, there's always this question of what do video game players perceive? What do they see? What do we want them to see? How do we want them to feel? And so in thinking about all of these things then, we come to a place in which we think about what we want people to perceive. And ultimately, how people perceive anything in video gameplay is predicated upon, in part, by our senses. Let's get going. So how visual perception of video games has been altered. The medium began in an abstract manner since video games were poor in quality. In the beginning, video games were not immersive, not even close. An abstract representation allows for simplification and an event. There's less emphasis on the picture. Why? Well, if we go back to the 70s and 80s, and I have Q*bert here at the bottom, and I implore you to Google Q*bert, a video of the Q*bert video game, or a video of Pac-Man for that instance, or any of the old video games as well, it's easier to modify and to create video games that are abstract because they're more simple in nature. It takes less memory. It takes less RAM to process. And so it's easier to run the game. It's easier to design the game. And so back in the 70s and 80s, this was not hard to do, and it made sense to do it. But if we think about how video game experiences start during these video games, we know there's a start button. You have to create, your own settings and options and select under what circumstance you'd like to play the video game. And ultimately, how we wish to perceive the game, how we wish to set up our experience. And so that's important to note that at the beginning of any video game, there's a menu. There's a menu that allows us to dictate options, settings, and what kind of video game experience we want. When all of us go see Jurassic Park 6, because it'll happen, we don't get to go into the movie theater and say, well, I'd like it if there were more dinosaurs, or, well, I'd like it if there were less dinosaurs. We don't have that option, at least not yet. And so in video gameplay, right from the beginning, we get to choose how we wish to manipulate our perceptions. We have that choice. Let's keep going. Immersion in video gameplay. Immersion means to be involved in the story of the video game. There is psychological immersion. Some of you are swimmers, I think, or can swim. Hopefully everybody can swim. If you're in the water, you're somewhat immersed if you and I can talk and I can see at least the top half of your body. Full immersion, though, of course, would be if your head and your entire body were underwater. And so in the same vein, that's kind of what immersion means in video gameplay. You're fully immersed. You're fully within the realm of the video game that you've elected to play. Consumers rely on their own visual perception sometimes through the avatar being controlled or selected camera angles. Now, I'm a big sports video game player. For the little I play video games these days, but I do like NBA 2K. I love Madden and those games, and I usually update on those games. I'll purchase the latest and greatest. And so, there are camera angles, like the TV camera angle or the wide camera angle. You can select different camera angles from which to play the game. And it's very, very popular and important, particularly in video gameplay, in sports video gameplay. And so it's important to really think about how we want to be immersed and the customization that's really available to video game players, even in how we view something during video gameplay. Let's keep going. Stories for the senses. Verbal representations enhance ability to present third-person stories. I think of games like Red Dead Redemption 2, any of those kinds of games, even Grand Theft Auto. I think of games that really have a lot of stories, embedded within them. Years ago, I played the Godfather version video game on the Nintendo Wii, and there were so many stories and characters and voices and really, really memorable lines from the movie that it was quite immersive. It was quite entertaining, and it really allowed me to hear really good third-person stories, And we're seeing this in Hollywood. The Economist had an article out, I think it was 2014, in which there has been an increase in video game design costs. Aside from tech, there are more Hollywood actors, writers, directors being hired to help create video games. Why? Well, in part, you're able to enhance third-person stories if you have good storytelling. And the fact is that video game players, on average, are about 33 years old. And so that means Pokemon Go may not just cut it. If you're making video games for adults, 18 and up, they need stories. There may be violence, there may be sex, there may be other adult themes, but, truly, you do need a story. Grand Theft Auto, each one, as much mayhem as there may be, has a story. You need a story. And so to feel emotions like love and hate and jealousy and sorrow, it relies on a first-person perspective. The way in which we absorb what's going on and feeling it and letting it resonate with us is important. If we think about things from a third-person perspective, we're reminded constantly during the video gameplay, well, this is happening to an avatar. This isn't happening to me, it's happening to Jeff. Jeff is the one who lost his daughter in a fire. The third-person perspective allows me to see the avatar in front of me. It's not happening to me. But if I have a first-person perspective, if all I see is me, and when I turn the controller or directional pad, all I see is what I see. I don't see an avatar. I'm looking from the view of an avatar. Well, then I feel those emotions a little bit more, don't I? It's a bit more visceral. It resonates with me. All of a sudden, I am catapulted into a maelstrom of perhaps different emotions. Motor skills also are heightened during this if we have a first-person perspective. They're needed for video gameplay that elicit emotions that are supported by the sympathetic nervous system. Fight or flight. Fight or flight. We've heard this phrase before. Some of us might have been picked on it on the playground. I was. And so, sometimes you fight the bullies, sometimes you run away. We have to think about this all the time during video gameplay, don't we? This is something that is primitive in scope, and it is something that has been built into our sympathetic nervous system. But we rely on these motor skills to conquer enemies, to save people from burning buildings, and whatever else we're doing during video gameplay. Video game screen also, to help us kind of navigate through, stimulates perceptions of space and objects. And so we have to judge how far away LeBron James is from us if we're playing against the LA Lakers. We have to judge what the space is if I'm trying to steal the ball from him in NBA 2K 2020. The term game itself implies repetitive action. That's another thing to note here. We do see some sort of repetition in video gameplay as our perception of vision and other senses are imbued during video gameplay. We see repetitive action going on. We see it constantly. It's a way to house ourselves within some sort of environment. However, video games are non-linear to varying degrees, which allow for choice. And so, in Grand Theft Auto, you may have a lot of different missions. In Left 4 Dead, you may have a lot of different missions. In so many other games, you may have a lot of different missions. So there is some repetition. But games are nonlinear. We have so many choices upon which we want to go through video gameplay. Let's keep going. Emotions. The game player must care about the goals of the game to make an emotional investment. That is crucial. If you don't sell your video game player within the first 5 to 10 minutes of whatever the plot is, you're going to have problems keeping them. But we make emotional investments all the time, don't we? If we seek having a dog, it's because we want to raise a dog. We don't get a dog to see it die, although we know, unfortunately, that is part of having a dog. I've had two myself. But the reason why I want a dog is because I want to raise it. I want to love it. I want to cherish it. And so those goals push me to have an emotional investment in Xena, who has now left us, as well as in Zoe, who my family currently has. So we all have goals that allow us to make an emotional investment, but the goals have to be clear and transparent. Games are heightened with a system of rules and emotions. Those are two really key elements. Now, if you're playing Call of Duty or Gears of War, Sometimes there may not be these kind of intense emotions. Sometimes it's, the emotions of, anger and frustration, perhaps, or feeling, bitter. Goals are tools to activate players, as the emotional experiences heighten the pleasure from attaining goals. So goals is kind of an enhancement, right? You can have a cupcake without the icing, but we all prefer our cupcakes with icing. Emotions are the icing. Emotions really help level up, so to speak, our video gameplay. They really help cement the experience, and they are spices to the video game bistro that we consume every time we turn on a console. Let's keep going. How consumers attain pleasure? So there are a few things that have to kind of be perceived by video game players. First, there has to be some sort of curiosity, right? Not everything can be given to you immediately, otherwise what's the point? As we know in any game, be it a board game, be it playing tag or freeze tag as a youth or as a child, there has to be some mystery, right? There has to be some curiosity. You don't quite know what's going to happen. As of this broadcasting, we're in the NFL playoffs. I'm hoping the Ravens and Kansas City Chiefs play each other. I don't know what will happen. Well, that's the point of a game. It's part of the pleasure that sports fans attain. Virtuosity. There has to be some virtuousness, some sort of opportunity to be courageous or brave or bold during video gameplay, something to try, something to engage in risk, something to take a chance on, some sort of challenge. We're also pushed through nurturing, that we feel like we're healing, we feel like we're getting better, we feel like we're obtaining something, we feel like we're growing, we feel like we can track these things. And video games are very good at helping us track our growth with points, with badges, with level ups, with promotions, whatever it may be. Video games all the time let us know where we stand. It's very addictive in that sense. And then a sociality component, being able to kind of talk about our own experiences, to brag, to connect with others, to brandish your legacy amongst your friends are all very, very good things that do give us pleasure. Let's keep going. Perception as a magic box. So if we think about the entertainment console, just as a slight deviation, we think about Xbox One, we think about PlayStation 4, we think about Nintendo Switch, we think about all these consoles, Steam, NVIDIA Shield. The entertainment console is a place for media convergence. So this is really, really exciting for a lot of different reasons. For one, we're able to toggle between passive and interactive entertainment. We're able to look at how this impacts consumers' entertainment experiences. If I'm watching CBS Big Bang Theory and then I elect to play Madden Football on Xbox One, does the previous experience have any bearing on how well or how much I've enjoyed the sports game? Well, probably not. Well, what if I was just watching the New York Giants playing the Dallas Cowboys, the New York Giants lose, and then I play Madden and I win as the New York Giants against the Dallas Cowboys? Am I feeling better or am I feeling worse? So there are a lot of different questions that are raised here as we're trying to understand this consumer behavior. Another thing is that video game consoles are kind of at a crossroads right now. They're trying to shift people's perceptions of them, and they're kind of going back and forth. The Xbox 360 and PS3 had a kind of an interesting dalliance, if you will. The Xbox 360 wound up trying to tell people that it was an entertainment console first. This also happened previously, as Xbox was trying to kind of push along it being an entertainment console. But of course, PlayStation retorted and said, oh, no, PlayStation 3 is for players, we're a player's video game console. Well, as you can imagine, the PlayStation 3 console won out handily. And it's gone the same way for PS4 as well. Video game players identify PlayStation as really being the video game player console. And after all, if both consoles are about $400, $500, only true and tried video game players are going to be paying that much money. people who might use the Xbox to watch movies like I do will pay less and will wait for the consoles to go down in price. So it's kind of an interesting time and place for these video game consoles. There has been the rise of personal computers and post-modernist thinking, this idea of thinking about what does it really mean to have a console past our modern age of having technology designated that your personal computer may have this function, that function, that function. This is what a phone does, and this is what a console does. We now live in an age in which everything can kind of do everything. So where does everything belong, so to speak? We are also shifting and exploring cultural rhetoric through television viewing as well as video gameplay. Our perceptions of what video gameplay means and should mean have evolved tremendously and have expanded in manifold manners. Video gameplay initially started out as just a child's activity, something that could pass the time while your mother was cooking. But now, video games deal with hookers. Video games deal with stealing. Video games deal with conquering countries. Video games deal with racism. Video games deal with a lot of different elements that are philosophical in nature. Video games deal with nihilism. What's the point of existence? If we play The Walking Dead, certainly there may be a corollary there with nihilism, the philosophy that considers in part what's the point to life. That show does tackle it, and now it is tackled in the video game. And so political ideologies like anarchy are regularly explored through different games. Grand Theft Auto comes to mind, and I recognize I've mentioned Grand Theft Auto quite often in this lecture, but a lot of these games that really give us free will are unprecedented and really allow us to behave as we wish to behave without any consequences, really without any risks, and provide fodder for us to consider what life really would be like if we were given these opportunities. So video gameplay has become more sophisticated in an intellectual sense as well. Our perceptions of what it can do for us are only really limited by our imaginations now, and even a decade ago, this really was not the case. Let's keep going. Perceptions of windowing. There's something else that's going on in video gameplay, and that's intellectual property. So how we perceive video games as interactive entertainment is just fine. But, as we know, or as some of us know, there is a new Super Mario Brothers movie coming out in 2022, I believe, produced by Illumination Studios, which are the people who did Minions and Despicable Me and all of that, and Secret Life of Pets. And so we know that we do have instances in which video games are consumed differently. They're consumed in a passive manner. We don't have control of Mario. Instead, we're seeing Mario and perhaps being told how Mario is and how he should be played and how these video games should be perceived. Remember, if we watch Jurassic Park, it's through the lens of a director who's telling us how to watch something. This is the way you should watch this. This is the way you should experience this. This is the way you should understand this. And through this particular lens, we all kind of come to the conclusion that, we all saw the same thing. In video gameplay, that's darn near impossible to have the same experience, even if we complete all the levels together. Some of us may go left more or right more, or collect all the mushrooms, or collect all the coins, or, we all have different experiences. And so placing interactive media into passive media is a very, very interesting item. And so in the past, we've seen this. We've seen this from, not E.T. E.T. was one of the worst video games of all time. But we've seen this through, Home Alone and Batman and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Licensed video games benefit from being launched alongside opening weekend of a partner film. This has been done and was done quite often in the 90s and in the 2000s and so on and so forth, in which video games were packaged alongside movies. Consumers may reject video games based on films, though, as they may seek something more than simple interactive rehearsals of films. And this is an issue. This is an issue when we think about brand extensions. This is an issue when we think about sequels. This is an issue when we think about what may happen in the future. You know, is it possible that they may stop creating Transformers movies and they may have, you know, the next Transformer property as a video game and then do a movie and then do a video game, right? Some sort of non-linear windowing business by which we augment consumers' engagement with the product. And so it may go from interactive to passive rather than giving them the option. So there are multiple ways to tell a story, obviously, but again, video game players, and if I haven't said this before, please note it, video game players are among the most shrewd, well-educated entertainment consumers on the planet. They know when a video game is good, they know when it's bad, they know when it violates norms, they know when it is honest and true to the story. And so video game players are a tough crowd overall to please. And so there have been bad iterations of video game adapted films. One is Super Mario Brothers from about 1991, 1992. I really do encourage you to watch the trailer. It'll all be all you want to see from the movie, but it is, you know, indicative of how difficult it can be to adapt an interactive intellectual property into something that is passive and is meant to kind of be fed to audiences who come to see it. Let's keep going. Sensation. Sensation allows us to interpret and feel experiences. Most entertainment consumption is hedonic based. Reference points may manipulate our senses, sensations, and therefore experiences with particular products. And so we know that if we touch, if we taste, if any of those items are engaged, we know that our reference points are augmented with said product. And so entertainment consumption is meant to be fun, it's meant to be pleasurable, it's meant to be wonderful to deal with. But this will ultimately engage our senses. And so this is why when we go to the mall and we're at that kiosk and we're passing by it and they're trying to put lavender soap in our hands or they're trying to get us to sit into a car, it's because they're trying to engage our senses. This is an old marketing advertising tactic by which the consumer has perceived ownership. If I place my watch in your hand, if I give you a cup of coffee, you will have some sort of perceived ownership. The item will be a degree closer to your yoke, to being under your control. And so sensations are engaged by entertainment properties really to instill that, to instill the perceived ownership, to instill the obligation to consume, the obligation to engage, and the kind of full immersive experience that video game publishers are out to achieve with their audiences. And so that's all the time we have on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.